songs that made the hit parade. Guys like us, we had it made. Those were the days. Didn't need no welfare state. Everybody pulled his weight. Gee, our old LaSalle ran great. Those were the days. And you knew who you were then. Girls were girls and men were men. Mister, we could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. People seem to be content. $50 paid the rent. Freaks were in a circus tent. Those were the days. This past summer, the creator of All in the Family, Norman Lear, turned 100 years old. He's still with us and apparently quite sharp. He wrote an op-ed piece that appeared in the New York Times about what his century of life has taught him. And I incorporated some of his wisdom in a few of my summer sermons. Because I am actually old enough to remember All in the Family when it came out, it gave a framework for me to begin thinking about what I have learned during my 6 decades on this planet. It helped me realize how much has changed in my lifetime and consider the essential role that nostalgia plays as we record our personal memories and longings for days gone by. I started to think about the All in the Family theme song, sung by Archie and Edith sitting at the piano at the start of each episode. I assumed, like many people, that it was an older piece that Lear chose as the theme for his radical new show about clashing cultures and generational divides. But if you do, as we say, a close read or exegetical analysis, you'll find many inconsistencies. The composer-lyricist team of Charles Strauss and Lee Adams, both still alive today at ages 94 and 98 respectively, and known for Broadway successes like Bye Bye Birdie and Applause, would have been in their early 40s when the All in the Family pilot was released in 1968. Now, one could stretch and imagine that they composed Those Were the Days, maybe 20 years earlier, say right after World War II, but a look at the lyrics makes you realize how unlikely that would have been. The song pines for what Archie and Edith felt like at a simpler time, back in the 30s and 40s when they were young, possibly in love, and before fights for racial and gender equality that their own daughter began to champion became a focal point of life in America. The bottom line is that this song, which pines for an era gone by, was actually written for the show. In his book, titled Those Were the Days, Why All in the Family Still Matters, author Jim Cullen notes that the song was actually composed to sound like a relic from Tin Pan Alley, which was a collection of music publishers and songwriters in New York City that dominated the popular music scene in the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s, before the Great Depression. So the reference to the good old days of the 1930s and 40s would have been anachronistic. The life and times of our favorite All in the Family characters are a snapshot of the flow of life in general and the changes that we all go through, including death. It ran for 9 seasons, from 1971 to 1979. By 1979, Mike and Gloria had moved out of the house, and it was renamed Archie's Place, and that iteration of the show continued to 83. That show had more spin-offs and secondary spin-offs than any other television show in history. Every character evolves. Edith, always sensitive and kind, grows into an almost prophetic voice of reason, a gentle woman with her own ideas and sense of purpose. Mike and Gloria, as I said, move out. They have a child and eventually get divorced. Archie, the ever-lovable curmudgeon, purchases a bar with a Jewish business partner has a Jewish business manager and hires gay waiters. He and Edith become foster parents to Edith's step-great-niece, Stephanie, the Jewish daughter of Edith's step-nephew, who had nowhere to take her as he struggled with alcoholism after his wife was killed in an auto accident. Opposed at first, Archie grows to love this little girl, and after Edith dies from a stroke suddenly, Archie hires a black housekeeper to help him raise Stephanie, and the two of them become good friends. As a side note, Edith's last episode was titled The Shabbat Dinner. Because Edith wants to help Stephanie continue living a Jewish life, she invites Archie's business partner, Murray, over for a Friday night dinner along with his lovely non-Jewish girlfriend. Thinking how fun this would be, Edith invites Murray's mother and his aunt to join them. Murray is afraid to let his mother know that he's dating a non-Jewish woman, and as expected, she is less than happy. The wisdom imparted by Edith to the heartbroken Mrs. Klein in the kitchen just before they bring the tureen of matzo ball soup to the table is a pastoral gem. And if you haven't watched that episode in 40 years, I encourage you to go, and you can just find it very easily. Change of all kinds in attitudes, relationships, hopes, and dreams, and so much more are embedded into the human condition. Staying with the character of Archie Bunker for one moment longer, it would have been impossible to imagine how the person we knew in the first 2 seasons of the show could be hosting a Shabbat dinner in his own home 8 years later. But guess what? Life happened. Life happens to all of us. Our children grow up, they leave the house, and people we love die. Our most profound losses can change us in substantive ways, including how we look at life, causing us to reevaluate that which is truly important, our priorities and even our biases, both overt and subliminal. Longing for times gone by is one of nature's great coping mechanisms for dealing with the inevitability of change. It is also natural for memory to become selective so that we can focus on the things that we long to reclaim. Mister, we could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. That's a head scratcher. Nostalgia is one of the many coping mechanisms that enable us to selectively remember our past with those who were so central to shaping who we are as adults. According to one psychological abstract, nostalgia is a self-conscious, bittersweet, but predominantly positive and fundamentally social emotion. It arises from fond memories mixed with yearning about one's childhood, close relationships, or atypically positive events, and it entails a redemptive trajectory. The liturgy of the high holidays is full of nostalgia. We are here today to reunite with God for another year of commitment and fidelity, and reaffirm our loyalty to our one and only Creator. But in order for this to work, we need to believe that God wants the same thing from us, which is why the Zichronot section of the Rosh Hashanah Musaf service is basically selective memory on steroids. I won't go into explaining that, but that could be a class, actually, that maybe I'll teach next year in preparation for the high holidays. But the truth is, for us to love God, we have to have a selective memory. Too many horrors have happened throughout Jewish history for that not to be the case. With that said, the daily miracles of creation, love, beauty, friendship, and the capacity to heal inform the divine essence that I communicate with and long to know better. And that's why I can sing with full faith throughout Yom Kippur, Ki anu amecha v'ata Eloheinu, because we are your people and you are our God. Nostalgia plays a slightly different role in our lives when it comes to coping with personal loss. It allows us to craft our memories and recall times when the one who is now missing made us feel loved, more whole, better about ourselves, comforted, safe, and so much more. In their book called Continuing Bonds, New Understandings of Grief, Authors Klass, Silverman, and Nickman suggest that building on memories enable the bereaved to create new relationships with the deceased. Under this model, when a loved one dies, grief is not about working through a linear process that ends with acceptance or a new life, where we have moved on or compartmentalized their memory. Rather, when a loved one dies, we slowly find ways to adjust and redefine our relationship with that person, allowing for a continued bond with that person to endure in different ways and to varying degrees throughout the rest of our lives. This relationship is not unhealthy, and it doesn't mean that you're not grieving in a normal way. Instead, continuing bonds theory suggests that this is not only normal but healthy, and that an important part of grief is continuing ties to loved ones in this way. And we should be showing the Yizkor thread now, Tyler, if you're there. Rather than assuming detachment as a normal grief response, continuing bonds considers natural human attachment, even in death. Nostalgia is the foundation for continuing bonds, and it's principally helpful when loss moves in the expected direction. But when dealing with a tragic loss, and particularly that of a child, parents and siblings are robbed of the years of opportunity needed to create the memories upon which nostalgia is built. In just a few moments, Ava will perform a Shakespearean monologue delivered by Constance in Act 3 of King John. Her memories of her son as a baby and little boy only serve to intensify her loss. One cannot be nostalgic for what might have been, but never was. Sometimes change is slow-moving, like shifting attitudes about systemic issues like racial and gender equality. Other times, change is radical, like when a natural or man-made disaster occurs that wipes away your home, your entire town, or the people you love. So too, death will lie somewhere between slow-moving and expected to sudden or tragic, or both. Nostalgia is a flexible coping mechanism that can serve to help us move through all different kinds of loss. If Charles Strauss and Lee Adams were to write a Tin Pan Alley knockoff for today's equivalent of Archie and Edith Bunker, what might the lyrics be now if we were longing for the 1960s, the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and maybe even the aughts of the 2000s? There's a lot of different ways that the song could be written, and I was thinking of asking Jason if he and I could give it a whirl for our next podcast. We're thinking of going back. I don't know if you ever heard any of our old podcasts. We did 3, but we're thinking of doing them again next year. But that would be so funny if everything we opened with a new version of Those Were the Days for now. Just an idea. What's most important to keep in mind is that as long as there is a world and as long as there are people in it, for the generations behind us, this time, right now, will someday be the foundation for their version of Those Were the Days. And our job is to give them admirable, ethical, intelligent, and hopeful things to sing about. Take a little Sunday spin, go to watch the Dodgers win. Have yourself a dandy day that cost ya under a fin. Hair was short and skirts were long. Kate Smith really sold a song. I don't know just what went wrong. Those were the days.